Despite our losses, despite the fallen suns, despite the eternal silence of the Emperor now watching over us in spirit instead of in person, we will endure. These are the words that set the stage for one of the most intense and gripping narratives within the Warhammer 40K universe. The Beast Arises series takes us to a time of great uncertainty, where the Imperium of Man, though vast and powerful, faces threats that will test its resolve like never before. In this analysis, we will delve into the first installment of the series, I Am Slaughter by Dan Abnett, breaking down the key events, character interactions, and thematic significance of each chapter, providing a comprehensive understanding of this grimdark tale. Our story begins on the desolate world of Ardermantua, a planet that has become a crucible of war. It is the year 544.M32, a time of relative peace in the Imperium, but peace is always fragile in the Warhammer universe. The Imperial Fists, one of the most stalwart and unyielding Space Marine chapters, have been deployed to this forsaken world to exterminate a Xeno species known as the Crones. The Crones, despite their relative ease to kill individually, pose a significant threat due to their overwhelming numbers. As the Imperial Fists engage these creatures, they form 8 defensive walls, encircling one of the primary family groups of Crones in a scrub-sided valley east of the BL Nest. The Crones are reduced to nothing more than burned shells and spattered meat as the Imperial Fists unleash their devastating arsenal. The scale of the battle is immense. The Imperial Fists, clad in their iconic yellow armor, move with precise, machine-like efficiency. Bolter rounds tear through the Xenos' ranks, lost fire cuts swathes through their masses, and the brutal impact of close combat weapons rends flesh and armor alike. The Crones, despite their numbers, stand no chance against the relentless onslaught. Smoke rises from the battlefield, not just any smoke, but a yellowish stain in the air, composed of atomized organic particulates and the backwash of Feistline smoke. The Muggos biologist, sent to assist the operation, reveals a chilling fact. The sustained fire and sheer ferocity of the Imperial Fists' assault have aerosolized approximately 7% of the Crones' collective biomass. Imagine that, an entire species reduced to particles, floating in the air like a toxic fog. This smoke, a cloud 20 kilometers wide and 60 kilometers long, drifts down the valley like a creeping dawn fog, a grim reminder of the battle's devastation. The Muggos biologist, a figure steeped in cold scientific detachment, finds this fact significant, though to the warriors on the ground, it is merely another consequence of war. Captain Courland, the leader of the 2nd Daylight Wall Company, is one such warrior. To him, the aftermath of the battle, whether it be smoke, blood, or ash, is just another aspect of the brutal reality he lives in. Courland's thoughts reveal his hardened nature. He is not surprised by the carnage, nor by the strange fact presented by the Muggos. To him, this is just another day in the life of an Imperial Fist. The Crones, despite being decimated, continue to flood the valley, their numbers seemingly endless. The only tactic that works is sustained slaughter, kill them all, leave no survivors. The battlefield becomes a nightmarish landscape, a testament to the sheer destructive power of the Imperium's finest warriors. As the battle rages on, the Muggos biologist, with his retinue of 300 acolytes and servitors, decorates the hillside with detection equipment and analysis engines. Tubes sniff the air, recording data, while picking and imaging devices catalog the anatomies of dead and living Crone specimens alike. The Muggos biologist informs Courland that the Crones are not a high-factor hostile species, information that seems almost absurd given the chaos of the battlefield. Despite this, Courland is forced to listen. The Muggos explains that the Crones, with their armored heads, necks, and backs, and forelimbs evolved into digital blades or claws, are not naturally aggressive. They are not hunters, nor are they a threat beyond their sheer numbers. Courland, however, is not convinced. He recalls the 18 million Crones that swarmed the valley that afternoon, a sea of silver glinting in the sunlight. He remembers the 3 brothers he lost from his wall during the initial assault, their lives taken in an instant by the overwhelming swarm. The Crones have been encountered on 66 other worlds in the sector, the Muggos informs him. 24 of these encounters took place during compliance expeditions at the time of the Great Crusade, with the rest occurring since. The Crones have never displayed such proactive hostility before, a fact that unsettles the Muggos. He compares them to radrats, a plague of creatures that swarmed out of fear when extermination teams were sent in. It is as if the Crones are acting out of desperation, their actions driven by some unseen force. But Courland remains unmoved. To him, this is just another battle, another enemy to be eradicated. When asked for his wall name by the Muggos, Courland's reply is simple and chilling: "I am Slaughter." This name, bestowed upon him by his brothers, encapsulates his very essence, a warrior who exists solely to kill, to protect the Imperium through the destruction of its enemies. Captain Courland's interactions with the Muggos biologists provide a window into his psyche. Courland is a warrior first and foremost, a product of countless battles. He views the Muggos' scientific observations with a mix of indifference and thinly veiled contempt. To Courland, the battlefield is a place of action, not analysis. The Muggos, on the other hand, represents the Imperium's cold, calculating side, a figure more concerned with data than with the lives lost in the conflict. This tension between the practical realities of war and the detached analysis of the Muggos is a recurring theme in Warhammer. Courland's frustration with the Muggos' seemingly irrelevant facts highlights the disconnect between the frontline warriors and the scholars and scientists who support them. Despite this, Courland remains respectful, if only out of duty. His thoughts, however, reveal his true feelings. He sees the Muggos as another obstacle, another distraction from the task at hand. The conversation about the Crones not being a naturally aggressive species further illustrates this divide. Courland's sarcastic response, delivered through his visor speakers, reflects his disbelief. He has seen the Crones in action, witnessed their ferocity firsthand. The Muggos' suggestion that they are not inherently hostile seems absurd in the face of the day's slaughter. Yet, this moment also hints at a deeper mystery: what is driving the Crones to such extremes? This question lingers in the background, adding a layer of intrigue to the story. Ardermantua is not just a backdrop for the story, it is a character in its own right. The planet is harsh, its atmosphere tainted by the aftermath of battle. The yellow smoke that drifts down the valley is a constant reminder of the violence that has taken place. This world, once a barren rock, is now a graveyard, a place where the very air is filled with the remnants of the dead. The Crones themselves add to the alien, hostile atmosphere of Ardermantua. These Xenos creatures, with their silvery exoskeletons and bladed limbs, are as much a part of the planet as the rocks and dust. They swarm in vast numbers, moving like a living tide across the battlefield. Their presence is overwhelming, suffocating, and it is clear that this planet belongs to them, at least for now. The references to other worlds where the Crones have been encountered further expand the scope of the narrative. These are not isolated incidents. The Crones are a widespread threat, encountered on 66 worlds in this sector alone. The mention of compliance expeditions during the Great Crusade ties this story to the broader history of the Imperium, reminding us of the ongoing struggle to bring order to a chaotic galaxy. The comparison to radrats, creatures that swarmed out of fear when threatened, adds another layer to the Crones. It suggests that there is more to these creatures than meets the eye, that their behavior is not simply a result of their biology, but perhaps something more sinister. This foreshadowing hints at the larger themes of the story, where nothing is as it seems, and even the most seemingly straightforward enemies may have hidden depths. The first chapter lays the groundwork for the story's central conflict, the relentless battle between the Imperial Fists and the Crones. It also introduces the key theme of the story, survival in the face of overwhelming odds. The Crones, while individually weak, are a formidable enemy in large numbers, and their sudden aggression raises questions about what might be driving them. The chapter also foreshadows the larger threats that will emerge as the narrative progresses. The Muggos biologist's observations hint at the possibility that the Crones are not acting naturally, suggesting that there may be a darker force at work. This subtle hint lays the groundwork for future developments, keeping the audience intrigued and eager to see how the story unfolds. As the Imperial Fists continue their campaign on Ardermantua, we are left to wonder, What is the true nature of the threat they face? Is it simply a matter of exterminating the crones, or is there something more sinister at play? These questions will drive the narrative forward, adding layers of complexity and depth to the story. Dan Abnett's writing captures the dark, gothic atmosphere of Warhammer, and this video will aim to do the same. The tone is heavy, filled with a sense of impending doom, and the description of the battle is both vivid and visceral. The AI voice will match this tone, using a deep, measured cadence to convey the weight of the events and the gravity of the situation. Every detail, from the yellow smoke to the swarming crones, will be described in a way that immerses the viewer in the world of Warhammer. The AI voice will slow down during key moments, allowing the audience to fully absorb the horror and intensity of the battle. This will not just be a recounting of events, it will be an experience, one that draws the viewer into the heart of the conflict. The battle on Ardermantua escalates as the Imperial Fists continue their brutal campaign against the crones. In the short span of 6 solar hours, the Astartes find themselves once more thrust into the heart of combat. The landscape, already scarred by the earlier engagements, is now blanketed in a filthy dust, a reddish haze permeating the sky. Above, the massive bulk of their barges looms like tusk-proud moons, a constant reminder of the war machine hovering above the battlefield. Chapter Master Vladimir Pugh had committed over 90% of the chapter's strength to this undertaking, a staggering show of force. To Slaughter, this deployment seemed excessive, a political maneuver as much as a military one. The Adeptus Astartes, especially a chapter as storied as the Imperial Fists, were unparalleled in prosecuting and finishing wars. Yet, in times of peace, their purpose could be questioned. This overwhelming display of power was as much about reaffirming their necessity to the Imperium as it was about exterminating the Xenos threat. Strategic surveys estimated the crone population at around 88 billion, with migratory scans indicating a possible spread towards the core worlds. Ardermantua, merely 6 warp weeks from solar approach, was perilously close to Terra itself. The Imperial Fists, tasked with safeguarding the heart of the Imperium, could not allow such a threat to fester. Surface scans detected another significant crone family group near the blister nest. The Imperial Fists mobilized swiftly. Led by Daylight Wall Company, they advanced across a broad but slow-moving river, its waters murky and waist-deep. The brackish water teemed with insects, adding to the squalor of the battlefield. As the Imperial Fists waded through, the crones began to resist, attempting to attack the Astartes as they crossed. The battle was ignited once more, with brothers firing from the soupy waters, pushing the Xenos back up the banks. The enemy was relentless. Crone corpses filled the river, spinning in the current as they were swept downstream. Yet, despite the ease with which they were dispatched, the Imperial Fists advanced with a sullen determination. The targets were too easy, the battle too one-sided. But Slaughter, ever the warrior, roused his men. If they were to engage, they would do so with dignity and honor. Daylight Wall stands forever, he voxed, his voice a rallying cry for his brothers. No wall stands against it. Bring them down. The men of the company responded, clashing their bolt guns and broadswords against their combat shields, chanting the refrain with growing fervor. The advance accelerated, transforming from a sullen march into a resolute charge, a wall of men, unbreakable and unstoppable. As the Imperial Fists emerged from the water, their yellow armor stained with oily green moisture, the crones began to show signs of desperation. The Xenos, previously overwhelming in number but lacking in individual strength, now challenged the Astartes directly. Slaughter, at the forefront, wielded his two-handed broadsword with deadly precision. The sword, a relic of the siege of Terra, had once belonged to a Fist called Immersive, who had fallen in that titanic battle. Now, it was Slaughter's to wield, a symbol of his lethal prowess. The first crone to challenge him was cut down with a single, sweeping arc of the blade. The Xenos was split through its gleaming bioarmor, its ichor spraying in all directions. More followed, each meeting the same fate, smashed aside, slashed open, or impaled on the ancient power blade. Slaughter's movements were methodical, each swing of the sword economical and deadly. He left a trail of shattered silver husks in his wake, the vegetation beneath his feet trampled and soaked with Xenos fluids. Beside him, Frenzy fought with an almost artistic grace. His axe, an heirloom of the chapter, moved with such speed and precision that his strikes seemed almost random to the untrained eye. Yet, each blow was deliberate, each movement part of a deadly dance honed over centuries of warfare. Frenzy's wall name was well earned. His constant motion, the fluidity of his strikes, and his unrelenting aggression made him a whirlwind of death on the battlefield. The Crone's numbers began to swell once more, their desperation evident as they flung themselves at the Imperial Fists. Slaughter barked orders to his men, keeping the line firm and unbroken. Heartshot and Chokehold, armed with a rotary cannon and a bolter respectively, surged ahead, cutting down the Xenos in droves. Slaughter kept them in check, ensuring they did not overextend themselves and leave gaps in the line for the Crones to exploit. The battle was brutal, the air filled with the sounds of gunfire, the roar of changewords, and the shrieks of dying Crones. Slaughter's focus was unwavering, his sword cleaving through the enemy with mechanical efficiency. Yet, even as he fought, a new threat emerged, one that would test the resolve of the Imperial Fists to its very core. The battlefield on Ardermantua is a vision of hell. The river, now choked with the bodies of the dead, fumed with the stench of decay. The air was thick with the reek of Xenos blood and the acrid smell of spent munitions. The sky, a reddish haze, bore witness to the slaughter below, the sun obscured by the dust and smoke that rose from the carnage. The Crones themselves, once dismissed as a low-level threat, began to reveal their true nature. As the Imperial Fists pressed closer to the blister nest, the Xenos grew more desperate, their resistance more fierce. But it was the appearance of a new variant of Crone that truly changed the tide of battle. These larger, darker forms were unlike anything the Imperial Fists had encountered before. Their armor, a resinous black and brown, was thicker and more resilient. Their claws, longer and sharper, could tear through even the ceramite plating of an Astartes. The new Crones moved with a clack, 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 a dull, ominous sound that contrasted with the higher-pitched tick-tick-tick of their smaller brethren. These were the Crones' elite, their mightiest warriors, kept in reserve until now. Their appearance signaled a change in the nature of the conflict. No longer was this a simple extermination, it was a battle for survival, for the Crones had revealed their own version of the Daylight Wall. The emergence of the larger Crones marked a significant turning point in the battle. Slaughter, though momentarily caught off guard, quickly assessed the situation. These were not just a subspecies, but perhaps the Crones' equivalent of the Imperial Fists themselves, a warrior caste, bred and trained to protect their home at all costs. Slaughter's realization came as he engaged the new enemy. These were not mindless beasts, but calculated defenders, held back until the last moment to protect the blister nest. The very structure the Imperial Fists were closing in on was the Crones' final line of defense. The battle had entered its endgame, and the stakes were higher than ever. The Imperial Fists were no longer just fighting to exterminate a Xenos threat, they were now locked in a battle against an enemy that mirrored their own resolve and determination. The tension among the Astartes was palpable. Frenzy voxed Slaughter, suggesting a fallback and regroup, a tactic that the Imperial Fists rarely employed. But Slaughter, ever the stalwart leader, refused. He knew what they were facing now, an enemy that was as committed to its survival as the Imperial Fists were to their duty. There would be no retreat, no regroup. The Daylight Wall would stand, and the Crones would fall. Slaughter's orders were clear and resolute: hold the line. Daylight Wall stands forever. No wall stands against it. Bring them down. His words, filled with unwavering confidence, were echoed by 100 voices across the battlefield, each one a testament to the unbreakable spirit of the Imperial Fists. The story now moves to Terra, the beating heart of the Imperium, where the air itself is thick with the scent of sacred incense, a reminder of the divine presence of the Emperor. In preparation for the midday Senatorum meeting, the halls of the Imperial Palace are filled with the fume of camphor, scepterwood, rose ash, and parvum. These sacred scents are meant to evoke the incorruptible sanctity of the Emperor's eternal form, a fragrance that, to the faithful, smells of purity and divine power. For Draken Vangerich, Grand Master of the Officio Assassinorum, these sacred rituals and devotions hold little meaning. He is a man driven by a different kind of faith, one rooted not in spirituality, but in the cold, calculating mechanisms of power and death. His interests lie not in the dead, even the divine dead, but in the opportunities that death creates for the living. Vangerich's morning begins with a calculated display of piety. He enters the Imperial Palace through Westwatch, following the quiet, secluded hallway walks behind the high gardens and daylight wall. Before proceeding to the Senatorum meeting, he pauses in the chapel ordinary behind the cloister wall to make a small devotion at the basin front. This act is not born of genuine faith, but of necessity. Vangerich knows that agents from various ministries and factions are constantly watching him, scrutinizing his every move. By performing these small acts of devotion, he ensures that he is seen to be doing what is expected of him, thus keeping his rivals occupied with superficial observations rather than focusing on his true intentions. This is a man who has mastered the art of deception, who plays the role of the dutiful, humble servant while secretly harboring ambitions and thoughts that would terrify his peers. As Grand Master of the Officio Assassinorum, Vangerich is the embodiment of lethal efficiency. He understands death better than most, not as a tragic end, but as the ultimate solution to life's most perplexing problems. He views his role not as one of mindless killing, but as a necessary force, a purifying fire that cleanses the Imperium of its most dangerous threats. As Vangerich continues his walk through the palace, his thoughts turn to the other members of the Senatorum. He reflects on how their activities, often ostentatious and public, are conducted to win popular support. In contrast, Vangerich's actions are carefully calculated to maintain his image among the ever-circling spies. He performs his role not for the masses, but for his rivals, ensuring that he appears trustworthy, noble, and above suspicion. His reflections are interrupted as he passes one of the Imperial Fists stationed within the palace. These Space Marines, known as the Wall Brothers of the Seventh, are the best of the best, elite warriors fated to serve out their lives guarding the Imperial Palace, the one place in the galaxy that war would never touch again. Vangerich feels a twinge of pity for these warriors, whose immense potential is wasted on ceremonial duty. Yet, he respects their dedication to their duty, a dedication that mirrors his own commitment to the unseen, deadly tasks he performs for the Imperium. The interaction between Vangerich and the Imperial Fist is brief but revealing. Vangerich greets the Space Marine with a casual remark, noting that he is likely late for the Senatorum meeting. The Imperial Fist responds with precise, almost mechanical politeness, informing Vangerich that he has a few minutes to spare and advising him to take an alternate route to the meeting, as the location has been changed. This exchange underscores the rigid discipline and formality that defines both the Imperial Fists and the upper echelons of the Imperium. Vangerich's thoughts during this interaction reveal much about his character. He sees the Imperial Fist as a figure trapped by ritual and ceremony, destined to serve out his life in polished armor, far from the battles that would truly test his mettle. Yet, when Vangerich asks the Space Marine if he longs for the chance to kill, the warrior's response is immediate and unwavering, "With every fiber of my soul and every second of my life, sir." This moment highlights the shared understanding between these two figures, both of whom are bound by duty to roles that are defined by death, albeit in very different ways. Vangerich, a master of assassination and subtlety, and the Imperial Fist, a paragon of martial honor and strength, are both products of the Imperium's relentless drive to maintain order and control through violence. This brief interaction serves as a reminder of the complexities of loyalty and duty within the Imperium, where even the most powerful and skilled individuals can find themselves bound by tradition and expectation. The setting of the Imperial Palace is as much a character in this chapter as Vangerich himself. The air, thick with sacred incense, evokes the omnipresent influence of the Emperor, even in his eternal silence. The architecture of the palace, with its towering galleries, approach halls, and the stately Walk of Heroes, serves as a testament to the grandeur and power of the Imperium. These halls have stood for 24 centuries, miraculously spared by the siege that nearly brought the Imperium to its knees during the Horus Heresy. The palace is a place of both reverence and fear, where the past is ever present, and where the weight of history hangs heavy over all who walk its halls. The great leaded windows of the Walk of Heroes look out onto the yards beyond the Eternity Gate, a view that has remained unchanged for millennia. Yet, within these hallowed halls, the machinations of power continue unabated, with figures like Vangerich manipulating events behind the scenes, far from the eyes of the public. The Imperial Palace is not just a seat of power, it is a symbol of the Imperium's enduring strength and the sacrifices made to preserve it. It is a place where history and tradition are as much a part of the fabric of the building as the stone and steel that make up its walls. For Vangerich, the palace is both a fortress and a stage, a place where he can perform the role of the dutiful servant while plotting his next move in the shadows. Chapter 3 shifts the focus from the brutal battles on Ardermantua to the equally brutal politics of Terra. Here, the narrative explores the internal workings of the Imperium, revealing the delicate balance of power and the constant maneuvering that takes place within the Senatorum. Vangerich's thoughts and actions provide insight into the darker side of imperial politics, where loyalty is often a facade and power is maintained through fear and deception. Vangerich's reflections on his role as Grand Master of the Officio Assassinorum underscore the importance of assassination and targeted killing within the Imperium's broader strategy of control. His musings on the necessity of death as a solution to the Imperium's problems highlight the ruthless pragmatism that defines the highest levels of power. This chapter sets the stage for the political intrigue that will play a significant role in the unfolding narrative, as the struggle for power on Terra mirrors the physical battles fought across the galaxy. We return to Terra, the seat of the Imperium, where the wheels of power continue to turn in the grand halls of the Imperial Palace. The Great Chamber, a colossal structure that has stood for millennia, has been the heart of governance on Terra since the palace was first established. This vast, formidable Colosseum has witnessed countless debates, decrees, and decisions that have shaped the history of humanity. It is here, under the gaze of the towering statue of Rogal Dorn, that the High Lords of Terra gather to steer the course of the Imperium. The Great Chamber is a sight to behold, its massive tiers capable of holding 500,000 people at full capacity. It has been meticulously restored after suffering damage during the Siege of Terra, a testament to the enduring legacy of the Imperium. At the east end stands a towering statue of Rogal Dorn, the Primarch of the Imperial Fists, who defended these very halls during the Horus Heresy. The statue was commissioned not by Dorn himself, but by Robert Guilliman, who insisted that his brother's efforts be eternally commemorated in this place of power. Yet, despite its grandeur, the Great Chamber has fallen out of favor in recent decades. The High Lords now prefer more intimate settings for their meetings, smaller, quieter rooms where power can be wielded with subtlety and discretion. Among these is the Cerebrium, a wood-paneled room near the top of Wittershin's tower, where the Emperor is said to have once meditated. The High Lords claim that convening in the Cerebrium brings them closer to the Emperor's thoughts, though Vangerich, ever the skeptic, sees it as a power play designed to exclude lesser officials. As Vangerich enters the Cerebrium, he is keenly aware of the power dynamics at play. The room is dominated by a large wooden table, around which the 12 members of the High Senatorum take their seats. Vangerich, like other secondary officials, is relegated to the sidelines, forced to observe from the shadows. This arrangement, he knows, is designed to reinforce the exclusivity and authority of the High Lords, a clear reminder that he, despite his formidable position, is not truly one of them. Vangerich acknowledges Lord Militant Hate with a nod, recognizing him as his only true ally among the High 12. Hate, an old and maimed veteran, commands the Astra Militarum, the largest military body in the Imperium. Yet, despite this, Hate often feels overshadowed by the more glamorous Adeptus Astartes and the Imperial Navy. This sense of inferiority drives him to seek out allies like Vangerich, whose influence, though diminished, still carries weight in the labyrinthine politics of Terra. The other High Lords present represent the various power structures of the Imperium. Lansung, the Lord High Admiral of the Imperial Navy, is a corpulent figure whose boisterous personality contrasts sharply with his carefully cultivated image of authority. He engages Tobris Eckhart, the master of the administratum, in idle gossip, all the while seeking to curry favor with Vernal Zek, the Grand Provost Marshal of the Adeptus Arbites. Zek, a heavily augmented giant of a man, feigns interest in Lansung's stories, though his mind is clearly elsewhere, likely processing the vast amounts of data necessary to keep Terra's hives in order. At the other end of the table, Cubic, the fabricator general of the Adeptus Mechanicus, is deep in conversation with Mesring, the ecclesiarch of the Adeptus Ministorum, and Helid Gibran, the Paternova envoy of the Navigators. Cubic's extensive augmentations, which began in his youth, set him apart as an almost inhuman figure, a living embodiment of the Mechanicus devotion to the machine. Vangerich, ever the strategist, watches Cubic with interest. Killing a servant of the Mechanicus, he muses, would require a different set of skills, a challenge he is eager to master. Vangerich's gaze then shifts to Abdelius Anwar, the master of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, a malevolent and discomfiting presence among the High Lords. Dealing with telepaths, particularly those as powerful as Anwar, requires a unique approach, one that Vangerich has cultivated through his close ties with inquisitors like Venand. Finally, his attention turns to Jaskina Tull, the speaker of the Chartist Captains. Though her role is often dismissed as trivial, Vangerich knows that in times of crisis, the merchant fleets she represents wield more power than even the Lord High Admiral. As the High Lords take their seats, Vangerich observes the subtle interactions between them, each one a carefully choreographed dance of power and influence. Lansung's loud, bombastic manner is a deliberate performance designed to project confidence and control. Yet, Vangerich sees through this facade, recognizing the insecurities that drive Lansung to seek validation from his peers. Zek, on the other hand, is a steady in contrasts, outwardly focused on the conversation at hand, yet inwardly consumed by the weight of his responsibilities. The relationship between Vangerich and Venand is one of mutual respect and pragmatic collaboration. Although Venand technically occupies the seat that once belonged to the Grandmaster of the Officio Assassinorum, Vangerich holds no grudge. Instead, he recognizes the value of working closely with the Inquisition, whose methods and goals often align with those of the Assassinorum. Their shared interest in maintaining the stability of the Imperium, even through the most extreme measures, forms the basis of their alliance. The subtle power plays within the Cerebrium are a stark reminder of the constant jockeying for position among the High Lords. Vangerich's role as an observer, relegated to the shadows, allows him to analyze these interactions with a critical eye. He mentally charts the relationships between the High Lords, noting alliances, rivalries, and the undercurrents of deceit that run through their conversations. His mind, ever the strategist, is constantly at work, mapping out potential threats and opportunities. The Cerebrium, with its wood-paneled walls and extraordinary views across the palace roofscape, stands in stark contrast to the grandeur of the Great Chamber. It is a place of quiet power, where decisions that shape the fate of the galaxy are made behind closed doors. The room itself is a symbol of the shift in how the Imperium is governed, a move away from the grand, public displays of power in the Great Chamber to the more secretive, controlled environment of the Cerebrium. This change reflects the broader transformation of the Imperium, where power is increasingly concentrated in the hands of a few, and where the decisions that affect billions are made by a small, elite group. The Cerebrium, though physically smaller than the Great Chamber, holds immense significance as the new seat of power on Terra. It is here that the true nature of the Imperium is revealed, a vast, bureaucratic machine, driven by the ambitions and rivalries of its most powerful figures. Vangerich's reflections on the nature of power within the Imperium offer a glimpse into the complex and often contradictory world of imperial politics. The High Lords, though ostensibly united in their service to the Emperor, are in reality a collection of individuals with their own agendas, each vying for influence and control. The Cerebrium, with its intimate setting, is the perfect stage for these power plays, where every word, every gesture, carries weight. Chapter 4 deepens our understanding of the political landscape of the Imperium, highlighting the intricate power dynamics at play within the Senatorum Imperialis. The focus on Vangerich's observations and thoughts provides a window into the often unseen world of imperial politics, where power is wielded not through force, but through subtlety and manipulation. The introduction of the various High Lords and their interactions sets the stage for the unfolding narrative, where the decisions made in the Cerebrium will have far-reaching consequences for the Imperium. Vangerich's role as an observer, positioned on the fringes of power, allows him to analyze the complex web of relationships within the Senatorum, providing valuable insights into the true nature of imperial governance. The shift from the Great Chamber to the Cerebrium symbolizes the changing nature of the Imperium itself, where power is increasingly centralized and where decisions are made behind closed doors. This chapter sets the tone for the political intrigue that will continue to unfold as the High Lords navigate the treacherous waters of imperial politics, each seeking to advance their own interests while maintaining the delicate balance of power. Continuing with Chapter 5, the narrative plunges back into the chaotic battle on Ardermantua, where the Imperial Fists confront increasingly fierce resistance within the heart of the Crone's blister nest. This chapter vividly depicts the brutal and unyielding nature of the conflict, as well as the mysterious and ominous events that begin to unfold. The tunnels of the blister nest echoed with the clack-clack-clack of the Crone's warriors, a sound that Slaughter had come to recognize all too well. It was the forewarning of another wave of the new, more powerful warrior forms that had been challenging the Imperial Fists at every turn. These were no ordinary Xenos. These were veterans, seasoned warriors, perhaps the last line of defense for the Crone species. The Imperial Fists had breached the outer layers of the nest, and now they plunged deeper into this alien nightmare, where the very walls seemed to pulse with life. The Imperial Fists' assault had been relentless. Daylight Wall, Slaughter's own company, had earned the honor of making the first breach into the nest, with Hemispheric Wall following closely behind on the opposite side. The blister nest, a massive organic structure the size of a Terran hive, was a labyrinth of curved tunnels and chambers, all formed from a grayish, semi-transparent material that seemed to have been extruded and woven together, hardening as it cooled. From the outside, it resembled a swollen, festering blister. Inside, it was like moving through the chambers of a living organism. The air inside the nest was thick with humidity, and the walls throbbed and pulsed as if alive. Fluids, pus-like and viscous, pumped through the structure, giving the impression that the very building was a living, breathing entity. The tunnels and chambers, more akin to the valves and ventricles of a giant heart, were dimly lit by the sickly green glow of bioluminescent fungi and mold that grew in patches along the walls. Vapor pockets hissed and popped as the Imperial Fists moved through, their yellow armor flecked with the slime and filth of the nest. As the Astartes advanced, the deeper sounds of the more powerful warrior forms became increasingly frequent, mingling with the steady thrum of the nest itself. The clack-clack-clack of the Crone's veterans echoed through the tunnels, a sound that was soon drowned out by the roar of air support. Low-flying attack runs from Thunderhawk gunships and the fiery trails left by airstrikes periodically shook the nest, their fury blossoming across the upper levels of the structure. Specialist vehicles, like the Cestus Rams, designed for shipboarding actions, had also been deployed, their armored prows smashing through the nest's outer shell to deliver assault squads of Shield Corps brothers directly into the fray. Within the dank, miasmal chambers of the nest, Slaughter waged his own war. The muzzle flash of his bolter lit up the green-tinted gloom as he fired at the advancing Crones. The larger, more formidable warrior forms earned the attention of his bolter, while the regular Crones were dispatched with the swift and deadly strokes of his power sword. In places, the floor of the tunnels was ankle-deep in the ichor of slain Crones, the fluid shimmering with the reflected light of fires and crimping with ripples every time an airstrike shook the ground. Suddenly, a pack of Crones charged down the tunnel towards Slaughter. The veteran Space Marine stood his ground, his sword and bolter working in perfect harmony as severed and exploded aliens were flung aside or sent hurtling back into their ranks. Slaughter bellowed the battle cry of Daylight Wall, rallying his brothers as they surged up the ducts and grimy arterial conduits that served as corridors within the nest. His armor, now smeared with soot and slime, bore the marks of countless kills as he fought with relentless fury. One of the larger Crone's veterans lunged at Slaughter. These were no ordinary enemies. Slaughter realized that he was beginning to think of them as fellow warriors, veterans, the old guard of the crone species. There was a mutual respect, born of battle. These Xenos had fought wars, perhaps across the stars, defending their kind and conquering territory. In them, Slaughter saw the echoes of his own kind, warriors bred for combat, with a fierce determination to protect their own. Slaughter's respect for these veteran crones did not diminish his resolve to annihilate them. He met the approaching Xenos with his blade, deflecting its slashing claws. The crone's veteran was strong, stronger than Slaughter had anticipated. It managed to knock his sword from his grip, but Slaughter quickly retaliated with a bolter round to its brain case, spraying grayish matter across his armor. Another crone charged, but Slaughter's bolter put it down with a well-placed shot that severed its spine. Frenzy, one of Slaughter's brothers, arrived at his side, his axe cleaving through the next crone with brutal efficiency. The bond between the Space Marines was evident in their seamless coordination, each covering the other's back as they advanced through the nest. Despite the carnage, there was a camaraderie in their banter. "Getting tired, Captain?" Heartshot, another of Slaughter's men, quipped as he tore through the crones with his rotary cannon. "I'll tell you what you can do with your rotor cannon," Slaughter shot back, retrieving his sword from the muck. Despite the horror of the battle, there was a grim humor in their exchanges, a shared understanding that in the face of such overwhelming odds, all they had was each other. As the battle raged on, reports came in from other companies. "Terra 6 and Ballot Gate are now in the nest with us," Frenzy voxed. Slaughter nodded grimly. "For walls should bring this place down," he replied. The Imperial Fists were systematically tearing through the nest, and with additional assault squads from Zarathustra engaging the enemy in the upper levels, it seemed the tide was turning in their favor. Yet, just as victory seemed within reach, a sudden and deep noise reverberated through the nest. It was a sound unlike anything they had encountered before, immense and overwhelming, as if the very fabric of space had been torn asunder. The noise shook the nest, overloading their Vox systems and sending painful shocks through their helmets. Slaughter's visor display flickered and rebooted as the sound faded. "What in the throne's name was that?" Slaughter demanded, his voice filled with a mixture of anger and unease. Frenzy immediately began checking with the fleet, but the initial reports were inconclusive. Chokehold, another of Slaughter's men, suggested it might be a new weapon. The possibility gnawed at Slaughter's mind, but they had no time to dwell on it. The battle was far from over. The blister nest, with its organic, pulsating walls and the sickly green glow of its fungal growths, is more than just a battlefield. It is an alien ecosystem, a living fortress that the crones have crafted as their last stand. The structure itself seems to resist the Astartes, its curved tunnels and chambers designed to disorient and slow down the invaders. The air is thick with the stench of decay and the acrid tang of Xeno's blood, every step through the nest a journey deeper into the unknown. Outside, the aerial bombardments continue, shaking the very foundations of the nest. The Cestus rams, crashing into the structure, create new breaches, each one spewing forth a tide of Imperial Fists into the fray. The battle is not just a clash of arms, but a test of wills, a contest between two species, each determined to outlast the other. The sudden, mysterious noise that reverberates through the nest adds a new layer of tension to the narrative. It is a sound that defies explanation, a harbinger of something unknown and possibly even more dangerous than the crones themselves. The fact that it is heard not just within the nest, but across the planet and in orbit, suggests that whatever it is, it has implications far beyond the immediate battle. Chapter 5 escalates the conflict on Ardermantua to a fever pitch. The Imperial Fists, deep within the blister nest, are locked in a desperate struggle against the veteran crones warriors. The battle is brutal and unrelenting, with heavy casualties on both sides. The introduction of the mysterious noise adds a new element of uncertainty, hinting at a larger threat that looms over the entire conflict. Slaughter's internal reflections, particularly his respect for the crones veterans, add depth to the narrative, highlighting the shared warrior ethos that transcends species. Despite the brutality of the battle, there is a mutual recognition of the skill and determination that each side brings to the fight. Yet, this respect does not diminish the resolve of the Imperial Fists to eradicate the crones and bring the nest down. Continuing with Chapter 6, the narrative shifts back to the desperate battle on Ardermantua, where the mysterious noised bursts continue to unsettle both the Imperial Fists and their support teams. The chapter introduces new layers of tension and intrigue as the significance of the noises begins to unfold. The battlefield on Ardermantua was a place of chaos and destruction, but amid the clamor of war, another sound, a mysterious and ominous noise, had seized the attention of both warriors and scholars alike. Among those affected was Muggos biologist Fertin Laurentis, a man whose life had been dedicated to the study of Xenos species. As the first noise burst reverberated through the air, Laurentis was preparing to enter the blister nest behind the advancing Imperial Fists. The powerful sound had devastated his equipment, terminally damaging 2 of his 6 specialized audio servitors. Like Slaughter, Laurentis had immediately contacted Fleet Tactical, but he had also sent direct Vox burst communications to his own vessel, the Survey Barge Priam, which was part of the Imperial Fists fleet in orbit. His requests were urgent and specific. He needed more audio drones, along with an array of complex devices to analyze the sound. His request was denied, much to his frustration. "Tell them I need at least a dozen more audio drones shipped to the surface," Laurentis instructed his communication servitor, a grotesque construct with a grinning bronze skull mounted on a wireframe body. The servitor clacked its teeth mechanically as it processed and transmitted the request. The response came back just a minute later, delivered in an oddly youthful female voice emanating from the servitor's mesh speaker. "Permission denied for surface drop of requested material." "On whose authority?" Laurentis demanded, his voice tinged with irritation. Undertaking command, the servitor replied, its bronze skull clacking aimlessly. Fuming, Laurentis ordered the servitor to open a direct link with the chapter master, but the response was typical, pending. Annoyed but resigned, Laurentis mounted one of the motorized carts that would carry him and his survey team into the alien habitat. The war-torn landscape around the blister nest was a vivid display of devastation. Smoke billowed into the sky, mingling with the blackened heavens as embers rained down. The ground was awash with the ichor of slain crones and the biofluids draining from the ruptured walls of the nest, filling the air with the stench of rot. For a man like Laurentis, this scene should have been fascinating, a rare opportunity to study an alien ecology up close. But his enthusiasm was dampened by the noise, a sound that had unsettled him deeply. He knew why, though the reason was not something he could easily articulate. The noise had an organic quality to it, something that suggested a form of communication rather than a mere weapon. Over the next 90 minutes, the noises repeated, each burst lasting longer than the last. By the time the 4th burst occurred, Chapter Master Cassius Mirren had already begun to suspect that these noises were significant. Mirren, a legendary warrior whose deeds were revered throughout the Imperium, was not one to overlook potential threats. Known for his temper, Mirren had been pacing the bridge of the battle barge Lanxium, overseeing every detail of the assault with the precision and intensity that defined the Imperial Fists. The Imperial Fists were renowned for their methodical approach to warfare, a legacy of their primarch, Rogel Dorn. Mirren, like Dorn, believed in meticulous planning and anticipating every possible outcome and preparing for it. This approach had saved Terra during the Horus Heresy and continued to be the cornerstone of the chapter's strategy. But the mysterious noised bursts had introduced an element of uncertainty, something that had not been factored into their plans. Finally, Mirren seated himself on the steel throne at the center of the bridge, his mood dark. The bridge crew, aware of their chapter master's infamous temper, watched anxiously as he gestured for the Vox servitor to connect him to Muggos Laurentis, who had been waiting for over 2 hours. The hololithic image of Laurentis flickered into life on the deck, showing the Muggos riding on an open vehicle, the light conditions poor and the image marred by atmospheric interference. The exchange between Mirren and Laurentis was tense, underlined by the urgency of the situation. Laurentis quickly explained his need for additional equipment, linking it to the mysterious noise bursts. Mirren, despite his frustration, recognized the importance of the Muggos' request. Laurentis was no fool. If he was asking for equipment in the middle of a battle, it had to be critical. You don't need to explain, Muggos, Mirren cut in. It concerns these bursts of noise, doesn't it? Your request came through right after the first one. You've never gotten in my way before, Muggos. It was slow-witted of me not to realize the urgency. Laurentis nodded, his expression serious. I believe the sound is organic in origin, Chapter Master. It may be synthesized and boosted, but my experience tells me it is organic. Mirren frowned, considering this. A bioweapon? Something the Crones have that we haven't anticipated? Perhaps, Laurentis replied, but I think it's communication, sir. Something is trying to speak to us. Mirren's expression darkened further. Are you suggesting the Crones are trying to communicate? They've never shown any capacity for sentient communication before. This attack may have pushed them to a level where they feel communication is necessary, Laurentis suggested. They may be desperate. This could be a plea for peace, or something else entirely. We need to understand what it's saying. Mirren, ever the strategist, recognized the potential implications. If the Crones were attempting to communicate, it could change the nature of the conflict entirely. But before he could press Laurentis further, the hololithic image began to distort. The Muggos appeared agitated, his image flickering with interference before it cut out completely. Re-establish that link. Mirren roared, slamming his fist down on the armrest of his throne. The servitor, its voice calm despite the situation, replied, transmission disrupted, Chapter Master. Third Captain Achilleos, standing nearby, quickly assessed the situation. It appears the Muggos' party has come under attack, sir. I can damn well see that, Mirren snapped. Deploy the nearest available ground forces to his location immediately. I need him alive. The scene on Ardermantua is one of utter devastation. The blister nest, a living structure of immense size, is under siege from the Imperial Fists. Its walls, once pulsating with life, are now ruptured, spilling ichor and biofluids across the battlefield. The air is thick with smoke, and the sky is blackened, lit only by the occasional flash of gunfire or the fiery trails left by aerial bombardments. Laurentis, a man who has spent his life studying Xeno's species, finds himself in the midst of a scene that should have filled him with scientific wonder. But the noise, that unsettling sound, has cast a pall over everything. It is a sound that defies easy explanation, a sound that suggests something far more complex and dangerous than a mere battle cry. It is, as Laurentis suspects, a form of communication, an attempt by the Crones to reach out, perhaps in desperation, as their defenses crumble around them. Chapter 6 adds new layers of tension and intrigue to the narrative. The mysterious noise bursts, initially dismissed as a mere anomaly, are revealed to be potentially far more significant. Laurentis' theory that the sound is a form of communication introduces a new and unexpected element to the conflict, one that could have profound implications for the Imperial Fists and the entire Imperium. The chapter also highlights the character of Chapter Master Mirren, whose temper and tactical brilliance define his leadership. His willingness to listen to Laurentis, despite his frustration, shows a leader who understands the importance of adaptability in warfare. But the sudden loss of communication with Laurentis leaves a sense of foreboding, suggesting that the battle on Ardermantua is far from over and that new dangers may be lurking in the shadows. The tunnels of the blister nest on Ardermantua were a place of living nightmares. For Muggos biologist Fertin Laurentis, this became all too real as he found himself face to face with one of the monstrous, darker-hued Crone's warrior forms. These were not the drone-like creatures he had studied from a distance. These were apex predators, built for war, and now they were upon him. Laurentis had been intrigued by the reports of these new Crone's forms, massive, dark-skinned, and heavily armored. He had wanted to study one up close, but the irony of this desire hit him with full force as he now faced one in the flesh. The creature was enormous, weighing close to 500 kilos, its hard-shelled back ridged with a sclerotic hump that gave it a menacing, hunched appearance. Its face was a grotesque cluster of ocular organs perched atop a head crest, with powerful, chattering mouthparts that emitted the unnerving clack-clack-clack sound like the ticking of a death clock. The warrior form had emerged from a side aperture in the tunnel and attacked the lead carts in Laurentis's convoy without warning. The first cart was mangled almost instantly, its occupants slaughtered, their blood and the lubricant fluids from the machines spattering the tunnel walls. Laurentis had no time to think, only to react as the confined space of the tunnel left no room for escape or maneuver. The servitors in Laurentis's retinue, equipped with lost weapons, opened fire, but their efforts were in vain. The lost beams glanced off the crone's armored hide, doing little more than irritating the hulking beast. With terrifying strength, the creature lifted another cart into the air, tipping it and spilling its occupants like toys. The tunnel's tight confines amplified the chaos, the echoing gunfire and panicked shouts creating a cacophony of fear and desperation. Laurentis was no warrior. His life had been spent in labs and field studies, far from the front lines. Yet here he was, caught in the maelstrom of war, a place he had always tried to avoid. The pilot servitor beside him, bonded to the cart's driving mechanism, turned its lifeless eyes towards Laurentis and spoke with an oddly melancholic tone, "Save yourself, Majorus." But how could he? There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide in the suffocating narrowness of the tunnel. The words only served to deepen his despair. The situation deteriorated rapidly. The crone's warrior form smashed into one of the gun servitors, its claws tearing through the bioorganic torso as though it were paper. Power cables shredded, and the servitor's power core exploded in a shower of sparks, filling the air with the acrid stench of burning ozone. The dying servitor, its systems in death throes, began to fire wildly. The lost guns on its wrists jerked and fired uncontrollably, sending lethal beams of energy ricocheting through the tunnel. The first volley struck down 3 servitors and a biologist's assistant in a heartbeat, their bodies crumpling like rag dolls. Laurentis watched in horror as another burst of lost fire blew out the portside motivators of a cart, sending it crashing into the tunnel wall. The stray shots continued, one of them striking the pilot servitor beside Laurentis in the head. The servitor's skull erupted in a burst of smoke, but its body remained rigidly locked in place, a grotesque monument to the chaos around it. Realizing the immediacy of his peril, Laurentis leaped from the cart, adrenaline surging through his veins. He ran, or at least tried to, stumbling over his own robes as he fled down the narrow space between the cart and the tunnel wall. His breath came in ragged gasps, his chest tight with panic. He knew, with a cold, detached clarity, that he was going to die. The thought consumed him, paralyzing his mind even as his body instinctively sought escape. Behind him, the crone's warrior form shook the dead gun servitor from its claws, the lifeless body crashing against the tunnel roof before bouncing off another cart. Laurentis kept running, though he was painfully aware of how poorly suited he was for this. The tunnel floor was slick with mucus and slime, and his boots provided little traction. He slammed his elbow into the vector casing of a cart, pain shooting through his arm, but he kept going, driven by pure, animalistic fear. Suddenly, a body flew over his head, smashing into the tunnel wall with a sickening crunch of breaking bones. It was Overseer Finks, the convoy manager, his lifeless form crumpling to the ground at Laurentis's feet. The sight of the mangled corpse brought Laurentis to a halt, the acid taste of bile rising in his throat. He knew that Finks was beyond saving, yet the sheer horror of stepping over a colleague's body felt like a final surrender to the terror engulfing him. In that moment, Laurentis froze. The fear that had propelled him forward now anchored him in place. He was shutting down, his mind overwhelmed by the sheer hopelessness of the situation. The cart beside him, which had offered some semblance of protection, suddenly lurched and buckled as the crone's warriors slammed into it, crushing it against the tunnel wall. The sound of metal crumpling, the clack-clack-clack of the creature's claws, and the wet squelch of blood and oil mingling on the tunnel floor filled the air. Laurentis's terror is palpable as he faces the imminent threat of death. His thoughts are a jumble of scientific detachment and primal fear. He recognizes the futility of his situation, his mind flickering between the instinct to flee and the cold realization that there is no escape. The brief interaction with the pilot servitor, whose calm directive to save yourself contrasts starkly with the chaos around them, underscores Laurentis's helplessness. He is a man out of his element, trapped in a scenario that no amount of academic knowledge can prepare him for. The warrior form of the Crones is more than just a physical threat. It represents the raw, unfiltered terror of war, a force of nature that cannot be reasoned with or studied from a safe distance. Laurentis's respect for these creatures, developed through years of study, quickly turns to a primal fear as he realizes that these beings are far more than specimens. They are predators, and he is their prey. The blister nest is not just a backdrop, it is a character in its own right, a living, breathing entity that amplifies the terror of the scene. The tunnels are narrow, oppressive, and filled with the detritus of war, blood, mucus, and broken bodies. The nest's organic walls seem to close in around Laurentis, trapping him in a nightmare from which there is no escape. Every detail, from the clinging slime underfoot to the echoing gunfire and the monstrous clack-clack-clack of the Crone's warrior, creates an atmosphere of suffocating dread. The presence of the warrior form, a creature adapted purely for combat, adds a new layer of danger to the narrative. These are not mindless drones, they are intelligent, deadly predators designed to defend their territory with lethal efficiency. The description of the Crones, with its powerful limbs, armored carapace, and terrifying speed, paints a picture of an enemy that is almost invincible in close quarters. Continuing with Chapter 8, the narrative shifts focus to the tense and chaotic situation in orbit around Ardermantua, where Captain Saba, also known as Severance, commander of Lotus Gate Company, faces a dire and unexpected threat. The orbital zone around Ardermantua was supposed to be secure, a stable point from which the Imperial fleet could launch and support the ground assault. But as Captain Saba, known by the battle name Severance, reviewed the data on the cogitator screen, he knew that something was terribly wrong. Captain Severance had been monitoring the recurring noised bursts from Ardermantua's surface, but the new data presented to him by his adepts was different, a separate phenomenon entirely. As he processed the information, he recognized a pattern that reminded him of a mass gravity curve, similar to a Mandeville point, though on a far smaller scale. This recognition, usually the domain of a seasoned shipmaster, earned him a look of respect from shipmistress Aquilina. "This isn't the noise bursts?" Severance asked, his voice tight with concern. "No, sir," replied the adept, "though they are recurring." As the adepts presented the data, it became clear that the orbital zone around Ardermantua was experiencing new gravitational instabilities. These anomalies, which had begun shortly after the initial noise bursts, were causing slight but measurable drifts in their orbital positions. Severance, understanding the potential gravity of the situation, ordered a channel open to the flagship. He needed to speak directly with Chapter Master Mirren. Crossing the long, cathedral-like bridge of the strike cruiser Enkelon, Severance felt a growing sense of frustration. His company, Lotus Gate, had not yet been deployed, and now, just as they were preparing to engage, this new threat loomed. Shipmistress Aquilina, recognizing the severity of the situation, quickly began coordinating with her data adepts to transmit the findings to the flagship. "If there's genuine, previously undetected gravitational instability in the orbital zone, we will have to back the fleet out. That would seriously compromise the ground assault," she warned. Severance nodded grimly. The anomalies, described as gravity blips popping up like blisters and then closing again, were unlike anything they had encountered before. Aquilina, though experienced with various gravitational effects, was equally puzzled. She had seen similar phenomena near mass giants or during warp translation, but nothing like this in a supposedly stable orbital zone. As Severance prepared to report to Chapter Master Mirren, the situation escalated. The Enkelon shuddered violently as a gravity pocket spontaneously opened within its starboard reactor core. The collision of massive forces sent a dull, heavy sound reverberating through the ship, followed by a gust of hot, acrid smoke. Alarms blared as the bridge personnel scrambled to their stations. "What was that?" Severance demanded, though the answer was already clear. The shipmistress, her voice cutting through the chaos, explained the situation with rapid-fire commands. The reactor was ruptured and venting, containment was uncertain. Severance, ever the soldier, was ready to fight through the crisis, but Aquilina, with the stark practicality of a shipmistress, gave a more dire order. Asterisk. Captain, please get your company and all auxiliaries off this ship now, before we suffer catastrophic anchor point failure and nosedive into that planet. Severance hesitated for only a moment, his warrior's instinct clashing with the harsh reality of the situation. The ship was dying, and with it, any chance of maintaining their position in orbit. He knew what he had to do. The orbital zone around Ardermantua, once a place of relative safety for the Imperial fleet, had become a death trap. The gravitational anomalies, seemingly random and unpredictable, were tearing through the fabric of space around the planet. The Ancalon, a mighty strike cruiser, was now at the mercy of forces beyond its control. The imagery of a cathedral-like bridge filled with lit galleries and function-specific crew stations only added to the sense of impending doom as this grand vessel faced destruction. The description of the gravity blips, brief, blistering distortions that opened and closed with alarming speed, paints a picture of an environment that is both hostile and incomprehensible. These anomalies, which bear a resemblance to phenomena associated with warp travel or mass giants, suggest that something far more dangerous is at play than a mere planetary assault. Chapter 8 significantly raises the stakes. The revelation of gravitational instabilities in the orbital zone not only threatens the safety of the fleet but also jeopardizes the entire ground operation on Ardermantua. Captain Severance, who had been eager to deploy his company, now faces the grim reality that the battle may be lost before it even begins. The chapter ends on a note of urgent desperation as Severance is forced to evacuate his men from the Ancalon, the very ship that was supposed to deliver them into battle. The question of what is causing these anomalies looms large, hinting at a threat that could extend far beyond the immediate battlefield. Continuing with Chapter 9, the narrative returns to the intricate and often sinister political maneuverings on Terra, specifically within the hallowed halls of the Imperial Palace. The focus shifts to the power plays and strategic discussions that shape the decisions of the High Lords of Terra, particularly in light of the growing threat on Ardermantua. The Senatorum Imperialis had convened in session for nearly 7 hours, a marathon of political discourse that had left many of the High Lords visibly weary. When Eckhart announced a 3-hour recess with 87 items still remaining on the agenda, dissatisfaction was clear on many faces. Draken Vangerich, however, had seen it all before. The problem, as he viewed it, was the inefficiency and bloat that had crept into the once sharp and decisive instrument of imperial governance. Vangerich, the Grand Master of the Officio Assassinorum, retreated to his private suite within the Imperial Palace. The old ways of the Senatorum, where the 12 High Lords dealt exclusively with matters of the highest importance, seemed a distant memory. Now, the Senatorum was weighed down by trivialities and petty power struggles, its members more interested in protecting their personal interests than in the welfare of the Imperium. This decline was painfully evident in the recent decision regarding isotope shipments, where House Messering's influence had swayed the vote to the detriment of the Imperium's shipbuilding efficiency. Inside his suite, Vangerich performed his usual security checks, deactivating the alarms and pouring himself a drink from tamper-proof bottles, old habits that ensured his survival in a place where enemies could be found at every turn. As he settled in, he noticed something amiss. Without turning, he aimed a plasma pistol at an armoire across the room, calmly addressing the intruder hidden behind it. A small, powerfully built man in a black body glove emerged, sheepishly acknowledging his failure to remain undetected. "Nice try," Vangerich remarked, lowering his weapon. "Every time, sir," replied the man, Calthro, Vangerich's bodyguard, slightly embarrassed. After a brief exchange where Vangerich pointed out the flaws in Calthro's concealment, the Grand Master inquired about the whereabouts of his guest. Calthro directed him to the atrium, where Vangerich found Inquisitor Wienand sitting by the thermal pool, watching the luminous fish dart through the water. The interaction between Vangerich and Wienand was laced with the kind of mutual respect and subtle tension that often characterized their meetings. Wienand, with her sharp features and silver hair, greeted Vangerich with a dry remark about his penchant for humiliating her bodyguards. Vangerich, ever the strategist, responded with equal wit, pointing out that such exercises were gifts from the Officio Assassinorum to the Inquisition. The two then turned to the matter at hand, the threat developing on Ardermantua. Wienen brought up Agenda Item 346, the Imperial Fists undertaking on Ardermantua. What seemed like a routine military action had taken on greater significance. A threat was emerging, one that had caught the attention of the Inquisition. A threat? Vengerich queried, his interest piqued. In the opinion of the Inquisition, yes, Wienen confirmed, detailing the growing concerns surrounding the Xenos known as the Chromes. She explained that the situation on Ardermantua, initially seen as a routine operation, had escalated. The Imperial Fists had committed nearly their entire chapter to the task, a decision that seemed excessive for what was originally thought to be a minor threat. Asterisk. Vengerich, known for his deep understanding of imperial politics and military strategy, was troubled by the implication that the Chromes posed a significant danger. The conversation quickly turned to the politics surrounding the situation. Wienen explained how the various power players within the Senatorum, particularly Lansum, the Lord High Admiral, were more focused on their own ambitions than on the safety of the Imperium. Lansum, with Udo's backing, was more interested in his campaigns against the Greenskins on the frontier than in addressing the immediate threat posed by the Chromes. The Imperial Palace, with its vast halls and private suites, serves as the backdrop for these high-stakes discussions. Vengerich's suite, with its dark oak paneling, gleaming black leather couches, and ancient artifacts, reflects the power and history of the Imperium. The quiet luxury of the surroundings contrasts sharply with the tension of the conversation, emphasizing the gravity of the issues at hand. Wienen's mention of intercepted communications between the Imperial Fists and their chapter house hints at the broader network of intelligence and surveillance that underpins the Imperium's governance. The Inquisition's involvement suggests that the situation on Ardermantua is far more complex and dangerous than it first appeared, with potential repercussions for the entire Terran core. Continuing with Chapter 10, the narrative intensifies as Major Biologist Laurentiis and Captain Slaughter navigate the deadly tunnels of the Ardermantua nest. The chapter vividly portrays the brutal combat between the Imperial Fists and the Chromes, emphasizing the desperation of the situation and the resolve of the Space Marines. The tunnels of the Blister Nest on Ardermantua were a nightmarish labyrinth, filled with the stench of blood, ichor, and fear. For Major Biologist Laurentiis, the situation had become a desperate fight for survival. The Chromes were not merely an alien species, they were a deadly force, more formidable than anything Laurentiis had anticipated. As the warrior form lunged at him, jaws wide and claws ready to rend him apart, he knew his end was near. But then, in a flash of yellow and a spray of mud, the creature was knocked aside. The impact that sent the Chrome crashing into the tunnel wall was like a sledgehammer hitting stone. The creature, though massive and powerful, was unable to rise, pinned by the sheer force of its attacker. Captain Slaughter of the Imperial Fists had arrived just in time. Even through the filth coating his armor, the rank markings were visible, identifying him as a captain. Laurentiis could scarcely believe his luck. Slaughter had the Chrome by the throat with his left hand, his right a piston of relentless power as he drove a combat knife repeatedly into the alien's belly. Each thrust was delivered with precision and force, until something inside the creature burst, spraying the tunnel with brown, acidic liquid. The Chrome went slack, its life force drained, and Slaughter rose from the carcass, though his combat knife remained embedded in the creature's body. But there was no time to retrieve it. A second Chrome, dragging the mutilated remains of a servitor, charged down the tunnel. Slaughter abandoned his knife, leaping over the corpse of the first Chrome and drawing his broadsword as he moved. The powered blade hummed to life, its edge gleaming in the dim light as the Space Marine met the Chrome head-on. The clash of their meeting sent a shockwave through the tunnel, the noise echoing like a thunderclap in Laurentiis' ears. The Chrome struck out, its claws sparking as they raked across Slaughter's armor. The force of the blows made the captain stagger, but he quickly recovered, driving his broadsword into the Chrome's shoulder with both hands. The alien reeled from the impact, its ichor slicking the blade. Slaughter did not hesitate. He delivered a second, more devastating strike that split the creature open, sending it crashing to the ground. Laurentiis, still reeling from the terror of his near-death experience, watched in awe as Slaughter dispatched the Chromes with brutal efficiency. The major biologist had spent his life studying alien species, but nothing had prepared him for this, seeing these deadly creatures up close, their strength and savagery fully unleashed. But Slaughter had little time to revel in his victory. The captain's keen senses alerted him to a third chrome, a dark, bruised-colored form moving with terrifying speed down the tunnel from the opposite direction. With a swift turn, Slaughter met this new threat head-on. His broadsword flashed as he struck, severing one of the creature's limbs before it could land a blow. The chrome retaliated with a flurry of attacks, but Slaughter was ready, ducking under its strikes and driving his sword into its chest. The blade cracked the creature's organic armor, and with a final, forceful thrust, Slaughter ended its life. "Muggos!" Slaughter called out, scanning the tunnel for further threats. "Yes, Captain," Laurentiis replied, his voice trembling. "Are you alive there?" "I am, Captain." "Get ready to move with me when I tell you. The chapter master has sent Daylight Wall to get you out of this." "It is very much appreciated," Laurentiis managed, still shaken. "I thought I was." "Shoo!" Slaughter interrupted, holding up a hand for silence. From the distance, the sound of bolt weapons firing could be heard, a steady staccato of destruction echoing through the tunnels. "There's a lot of opposition in this zone," Slaughter said, his tone grim. "A lot." Laurentiis began to wonder where the rest of Daylight Wall Company had gone. The Imperial Fists had been expected to clear the area, but the resistance they were encountering suggested that the Chromes were far more numerous and determined than anticipated. The Blister Nest, a living, breathing fortress of the Chromes, was more than just a battlefield. It was a testament to the alien species' resilience and adaptability. The tunnels, filled with the ruins of Laurentiis' convoy, were a grim reminder of the price of underestimating this enemy. The shredded carriages, the dead servitors, and the blood smoke wafting through the air all painted a picture of a fight that was far from over. As they moved through the tunnel, Laurentiis could not help but notice the signs of the intense battle that had taken place. The Chromes, which he had once thought of as mere vermin, had shown unexpected resolve within the perimeter of their nest. Their tenacity was alarming, and the realization that the Space Marines were running low on munitions only added to the gravity of the situation. Chapter 10 highlights the dire circumstances facing the Imperial Fists on Ardermantua. The Chromes, initially believed to be a minor threat, have proven to be far more dangerous than expected. The fact that Slaughter had run out of bolt rounds and was forced to rely on his sword indicates the intensity of the conflict and the toll it is taking on the Imperial forces. The chapter also explores the psychological impact of the battle on Laurentiis, who was forced to confront the reality of the Chrome's threat. His attempt to make light of the situation, mirrored by Slaughter's own attempt at humor, underscores the desperation of their circumstances. The realization that even the Space Marines, the Emperor's finest warriors, are struggling against these aliens suggests that the situation on Ardermantua is rapidly spiraling out of control. Continuing with Chapter 11, the tension escalates as Chapter Master Cassius Mirren faces the catastrophic events unfolding in orbit around Ardermantua. The loss of ships and the unexplained gravitational distortions suggest that the situation is rapidly spiraling out of control, threatening the success of the Imperial Fists mission and the safety of the fleet. Mirren's gaze was fixed on the main viewers and repeater screens, though the images were distorted by radiation backwash and unexplained gravimetric anomalies. This was what Captain Severance had tried to warn them about before the Amculon had been crippled. The ship, once a proud vessel of the Imperial Navy, was now a drifting hulk, slowly being pulled into Ardermantua's gravity well. "If Lotus Gate can't get clear." Mirren's voice trailed off as he turned to First Captain Achilleos. Achilleos shook his head, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "We don't know yet, sir. We're trying to find out, but we haven't seen any drop pods or escape boats." The truth was, it was hard to see much of anything. The radiation and gravimetric distortions obscured the view screens, making it difficult to assess the full extent of the damage. Mirren had already mobilized most of the Lanxium's tech staff to analyze the data sent over from the Amculon, but the initial reports were grim. Gravity pockets were appearing in various orbital locations, and no one could explain why they hadn't been detected before the fleet moved into its assault anchor. And now there was the Amculon itself, a whole ship, along with its complement of Shield Corps brothers, potentially lost. Mirren's jaw tightened as he watched the flickering, unstable image of the strike cruiser. It was slowly descending into Ardermantua's gravity field, its crippled drives unable to support its mass. How long did they have? An hour? 2? Perhaps 4 at the most. But even that might be optimistic. The drives would likely fail completely under the strain long before then. Can we get relief boats out to them? Mirren asked, desperation edging into his usually controlled tone. We're trying now, sir, Achilleos responded, though he didn't sound confident. We must be able to fetch some of them off it. Yes, sir. Mirren turned to the ranks of technicians and science adepts working frantically at their stations. I want this explained, he demanded. I want this accounted for and explained. The adepts nodded, but Mirren could see the uncertainty in their eyes. They were just as mystified as he was. Before he could press them further, a sudden flash of light illuminated the bank of screens behind him. The flare was so bright it momentarily overwhelmed the viewers, flooding the bridge with stark, blinding light. What was that? Mirren barked, spinning around. Was that the Amculon? The airwaves filled with an ugly cacophony of vox static and distortion, drowning out the usual chatter of the command bridge. The detection officer, a young adept with a pale, frightened face, looked up from his console, his voice trembling. No, sir, the adept stammered. That wasn't the Amculon. Mirren's blood ran cold as the next words came over the vox, delivered with a mix of shock and fear. Sir, the battle barge and thorax just exploded, sir. Mirren's hands clenched into fists as he absorbed the news. The Antorax, one of the most formidable ships in the Imperial fleet, was gone, destroyed in an instant. The loss of such a critical asset was not only a severe blow to the fleet's strength, but also a devastating psychological hit to the Imperial Fists. The battle barge had been a symbol of their power and resilience, and now it was nothing but debris scattering across the void. The command bridge fell into a stunned silence, the only sound the crackling of static and the faint, distant alarms signaling the catastrophe. Mirren's mind raced, trying to process the implications of this new disaster. He had seen many battles, lost countless brothers, but this was something different. Something beyond the scope of their usual enemies. A new and terrible force was at work, and it was tearing apart his fleet from within. Achilleos stepped closer to Mirren, his voice low and steady, trying to bring some semblance of control to the situation. Sir, we need to pull the fleet back. These gravitational anomalies, they're too dangerous. We've already lost the Antorax and the Amculon is failing. We can't afford to lose more ships. Mirren's eyes burned with frustration and fury. He knew Achilleos was right, but retreat was a bitter pill to swallow. Yet, he also knew that staying put could mean the annihilation of his entire fleet. Prepare the fleet for withdrawal, Mirren ordered, his voice heavy with reluctant resolve. But keep the retrieval efforts going for the Amculon. We don't leave our brothers behind. Achilleos nodded, moving swiftly to relay the orders. The bridge crew, shaken but disciplined, began the preparations for what would be a difficult and dangerous maneuver. The gravimetric distortions would make any withdrawal fraught with peril, but there was no other choice. The orbital zone around Ardermantua, once a place of strategic advantage for the Imperial forces, had transformed into a deadly trap. The unexplained gravitational anomalies and radiation backwash were tearing through the fleet, destroying ships with terrifying ease. The destruction of the Antorax, a mighty battle barge, underscored the unprecedented nature of the threat they were facing. This was no ordinary battle, it was a confrontation with forces that defied the Imperium's understanding of warfare. The fleet, now on the brink of retreat, faced a new kind of enemy, one that could not be fought with bolters or swords. The sheer scale of the disaster hinted at powers beyond the material realm, something that even the seasoned warriors of the Imperial Fists were ill-prepared to confront. The sky over Ardermantua was a dark, weeping expanse, drizzling a sticky, unnatural rain that clung to everything it touched. Captain Slaughter pulled himself out of a half-collapsed tunnel, emerging onto the surface of the blister nest, a grotesque landscape that stretched out before him like some vast, diseased organism. The nest was a twisted, organic sprawl of tunnels, lumps, and lobed chambers, some sections looking like the fossilized remains of ancient creatures, others crushed and mangled by orbital bombardments and airstrikes. The rain wasn't water. It was something else, something unnatural that fell in sheets, slicking the already treacherous surface of the nest. Slaughter called out for his men, and soon Cutthroat, Woundmaker, Stab, and the major biologist Laurentis emerged from the tunnel behind him. The 4 space marines moved with ease over the rain-slicked surface, their armored forms cutting through the storm, while Laurentis struggled to keep up, slipping and sliding in the muck. Slaughter had left the rest of Daylight Wall Company inside the nest under Frenzy's command, as per the chapter master's express orders. His mission was clear: get Laurentis to the designated contact point. Only a few of them were needed for this task, no sense in risking an entire company. Slaughter had tried to vox this decision to the Lanceum, but the communication was garbled, chopped up by interference. The situation was beginning to feel all too familiar to the veteran captain, reminiscent of the disastrous battle on Carotin Monument. As they moved, Laurentis pointed towards the sky, his voice filled with confusion and alarm. Slaughter turned to see what the major biologist was indicating, a strange light in the sky, a diffuse glow that bled through the thick clouds. At its heart was a small, glowing red coal, a burning ember in the storm. "That's a ship death," Cutthroat said bluntly, his voice filled with grim certainty. Asterisk. The realization settled heavily on the group. They had all seen ships die from planetside before, and the sight was as heart-wrenching as it was terrifying. The Imperial Fists exchanged glances through their visors, rain beating off their beaked helms. The question hung in the air: when had the Chromes developed the capability to take out ships? Laurentis tried to offer explanations, stammering about the Chrome's potential methods of interstellar travel, but his voice faltered under the intense, unyielding stares of the Space Marines. Slaughter cut through the speculation with cold, practical logic: if the Chromes didn't have the means to destroy a ship, then someone else did. The implications of this were deeply unsettling. The major biologist was clearly out of his element, his scientific curiosity clashing with the brutal realities of war. The Imperial Fists, seasoned warriors, were focused solely on the mission. Woundmaker, ever the pragmatic sergeant, distributed bolter reloads recovered from a mangled munitions train, his movements precise and efficient despite the dire circumstances. Laurentis, despite his fear, attempted to assert his value, theorizing that the bursts of noise they had been hearing were not random, but a form of communication from the Chromes. This caught Slaughter's attention. The major biologist suggested that the Chromes, long believed to be simple, non-sapient creatures, might actually be trying to communicate, perhaps even issuing a challenge or a demand for surrender. Slaughter, always direct, demanded that Laurentis prove his theory. But there was no time for extended discussions. The mission had to continue. As we reach the conclusion of the first 12 chapters of The Beast Arises, I Am Slaughter, we find ourselves deep in the heart of the Warhammer universe, where the brutal reality of the Imperium's endless war against the Xenos is laid bare. The story so far has taken us from the blood-soaked battlefields of Ardermantua to the shadowed halls of the Imperial Palace on Terra, each chapter unraveling new layers of intrigue, danger, and the ever-present threat of annihilation. We've witnessed the Imperial Fists, some of the Emperor's finest warriors, facing a foe they initially underestimated, the Chromes. What began as a routine extermination mission has evolved into a desperate struggle for survival. The Chromes, once thought to be mere vermin, have revealed a terrifying potential for communication, strategy, and possibly even the ability to wage war on an interstellar scale. Meanwhile, in orbit, the Imperial fleet is besieged by mysterious gravitational anomalies, leading to catastrophic losses like the destruction of the battle barge Antorax. The situation is dire, and the once clear objective of the mission is now shrouded in uncertainty. On Terra, the political machinations of the Senatorium Imperialis remind us that the war is not just fought on distant worlds, but also in the corridors of power. The Inquisition and the High Lords grapple with their own agendas, unaware, or perhaps unwilling to fully acknowledge, the growing threat that could soon reach the heart of the Imperium itself. The tension between ambition and duty, between personal gain and the survival of humanity, is ever present, adding another layer of complexity to the unfolding crisis. These first 12 chapters have set the stage for what promises to be a dark and thrilling narrative. We've seen the seeds of a much larger conflict being sown, and the fate of not just Ardermantua, but perhaps the entire Imperium, hangs in the balance. The Chromes are proving to be more than just a nuisance. They may be the harbingers of something far more dangerous, something that could shake the foundations of the Imperium to its core. As we prepare to continue this journey, the questions loom large. What is the true nature of the Chromes? What role will the Inquisition and the High Lords play in the events to come? And can the Imperial Fists, with all their strength and resolve, overcome the horrors that are beginning to unfold on Ardermantua? Stay tuned for the next installment of The Beast Arises, I Am Slaughter, where we will delve deeper into this epic tale of war, politics, and survival. The stakes are higher than ever, and the story is only just beginning to reveal its darkest secrets. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the Warhammer 40K universe. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps us continue exploring these incredible stories. Until next time, remember, in the grim darkness of the